The half-blood and the rancher, original opening line. They hanged her on the tree for being half-blood until the rancher cut the rope and called her mine. Rewritten opening line, suspended from an oak for her mixed heritage. She was moments from death until the lone rancher arrived, severed the bind, and claimed her as his own. The discovery setting the scene. The boundary of the New Mexico territory. Late spring, 1873. A desolate expanse where the arid plains gave way to rolling hills. A persistent wind swept across the landscape, carrying nothing but grit and silence. The sun beat down relentlessly, baking the cracked earth and thorny scrub. The search. Randy Reiner rode at a measured pace, his gaze fixed on the dry earth, searching for any sign of the chestnut mare that had bolted the night before. His tracking of hoof prints had consumed most of the morning, the horse's faint prints leading toward a sparse cluster of cottonwood trees. The air was thick, shimmering with heat. Randy pulled his hat lower to shield his eyes and dismounted. Leading his own horse by the reins, he moved with the light, practiced steps of a man whose life had been spent in solitude, his eyes constantly analyzing the terrain. The sound. That's when a sound reached him, so subtle it could have been merely the grass shifting. Yet it came again, a faint, ragged intake of breath, like a struggle to draw air. He stopped instantly. Randy released the reins, pulled his rifle from its sling, and approached the sound with careful, deliberate strides. The sight. The shade beneath the trees was dense. The birds were silent. The air felt unnaturally heavy. Then he saw her. She was strung up by her wrists from a thick, ancient branch, her arms pulled taut overhead, her body listless and swaying gently. Nailed crudely above her was a wooden placard. "Mixed blood does not belong." Randy's breath hitched. He instinctively recoiled, as if the words themselves were a physical threat. The message wasn't just for her. It was a grim warning to any passerby. The girl's skin was dark from the sun and streaked with filth. Her long black hair clung to her face in matted strands. Her gown was shredded, coated in dust, and marked with dried blood. Her legs dangled, her feet barely skimming the ground. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, intermittent movements. She was alive, just barely. Randy slowly lowered his rifle. "Dear God," he murmured, moving forward. Up close, he could see the angry, raw burns where the rope had cut deep into her wrists. Her lips were cracked, her cheeks gaunt with dehydration. One eye was swollen shut. "Can you hear me, girl?" Randy asked, his voice rough yet gentle. No response. Her head hung like a broken flower stem. "I'm not here to harm you." Still no movement, but a sound escaped her, a weak, watery whimper. That was enough. Randy reached for his belt and drew his knife. His fingers paused over the rope for the briefest moment. The sign above them was a jagged, glaring threat. Then, almost to himself, he whispered, "Not today." With a quick, decisive movement, the knife severed the rope. She plummeted forward. Randy caught her just in time. She was weightless in his arms, faint as smoke, radiating fever. Her head rested against his chest. For a moment, her eyes fluttered open, dazed, unfocused, her lips moving without sound. Then her fingers weakly grasped his shirt, and her body fell slack. Randy sank to a crouch, supporting her with one arm while reaching for his canteen with the other. He poured a few drops onto a cloth scrap and dampened her mouth. "Easy now," he murmured. "You're safe, at least for the moment." The wind rustled the branches overhead. The sign above creaked. He looked up at it one last time, then down at her, and without another word, he stood, lifting her into his arms. She was no heavier than a feed sack. "Got a name?" he asked, knowing the silence was his answer. Silence. Suppose we'll find one. He turned away from the tree, from the warning, from the fate they had intended for her. His boots softly crushed the dry leaves as he walked back toward his horse. Behind him, the sign continued its lonely swing, but the girl was gone. The hearth, the ranch. Later that evening. Reiner's ranch. A humble cabin and a small barn, tucked into a dry hollow, miles from any settlement. The land stretched empty, broken only by sagebrush and rock. The sun was dipping low as Randy rode into the ravine. The girl lay across the saddle, unconscious but breathing. Randy dismounted and carefully lifted her down, holding her as if she were made of fragile glass. The cabin door groaned open under his boot. Inside, the air was cool, smelling of cedar and dust. He laid her gently on the single cot by the window, covering her with a clean wool blanket. She stirred, her brow furrowing, her fingers curling slightly. "Rest easy," Randy whispered. He lit the oil lamp, its glow dancing across the rough-hewn walls. He crossed the room, grabbed his basin, and filled it with water from the jug. He warmed it on the stove before returning, kneeling beside her. Her face was bruised, dry, and streaked with sweat and blood. Without speaking, Randy dipped the cloth into the water and began to clean her skin slowly, gently, with the patience of a man used to repairing broken things, wary of causing more damage. He attended to her wrists last. The rope burns were deep, inflamed, angry. His hand hovered over her arm. Then, with a steady hand, he wrapped the wounds in clean linen, tying each knot loose but firm. Hours passed. The wind picked up outside, rattling the shutters, but the cabin remained quiet. She had not spoken, even in her sleep. Randy sat on the floor by the door, watching the shifting shadows. The awakening. Then, sometime past midnight, she stirred again. Her eyes snapped open, dark, and filled with terror. She bolted upright, gasping, her hands tearing at the blanket, as if struggling to break free. Hold on, Randy said, standing quickly but keeping his distance. "You're all right. You're safe here." Naomi looked wildly around the cabin, her breath sharp and uneven. Her gaze fixed on him. She flinched violently. Randy didn't approach. "I am not them," he said softly. "I won't hurt you." She said nothing, just stared, her eyes frantic. "You don't have to speak. You don't even have to stay," he added. "But I cut you down for a reason. And it wasn't to watch you die slowly in my home." Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Randy walked to the shelf, poured water into a cup, and set it on the table near her cot, then backed away. She watched his every move like a cornered beast. He sat back down in the far corner. Silence descended. The wind howled outside, but the cabin held firm. Eventually, she reached for the cup. Her hands shook, but she drank deeply. Randy saw the exact moment the tension eased. Her shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. Her eyes were no longer looking past him, but at him. Still guarded, still silent, but no longer vacant. She lay back down slowly, cradling the cup. Randy didn't speak again that night. He simply watched her drift into sleep, the water half finished, the linen on her wrists faintly stained. In the dark, he whispered mostly to himself, "You are safe here. That's all you need to know." And in the silence that followed, she did not speak, but she did not run. The fire burned the vigil. The dry, biting wind continued to sweep across the Rayner ranch, whipping up sand that scratched the hard-packed earth. Over a week had passed since Randy had brought Naomi back, and the silence between them had become a settled, unspoken agreement. Yet, a subtle unease had begun to permeate the air, a feeling Randy couldn't shake. He first noticed it in the morning light, a set of footprints, too small and too fresh to be his. They skirted the perimeter of the barn and vanished near the well. The soil was soft there, preserving the prints like a photograph. Someone had been watching. He kept the discovery to himself. But from that day on, he slept with his rifle across his lap, propped against the door. He checked the lock nightly and meticulously scanned the horizon before letting the horses graze. Every evening, he sat on the porch long after sunset, the lantern flickering at his feet. Naomi had not yet ventured outside. She remained mostly by the window, wrapped in Randy's old coat, observing the world with wary eyes. The sign, that changed one evening, just as the final rays of sun painted the ground a deep crimson and the air cooled. Without a word, she pushed the door open and stepped barefoot into the yard. Randy looked up sharply from where he was whittling a piece of driftwood. He said nothing, simply watched as she moved slowly across the dust, her steps tentative, as if refamiliarizing herself with the solid ground. In her hand was a long, thin stick. She knelt in the open area near the barn and began to draw. Randy rose, his curiosity outweighing his caution. He approached carefully, unwilling to interrupt whatever instinct had finally drawn her out. Naomi did not flinch when he stopped a few feet behind her. Her concentration was on the dirt as the lines took form, sweeping arcs, pointed wings, a body erupting in flame. It was a bird in flight, wreathed in fire. "What is that?" Randy asked softly, his voice barely a breath. She didn't look up. "It is my family's emblem," she replied, her voice rough but firm. "The firebird." The silence stretched. Randy crouched beside her, studying the image. "My mother used to paint it on our tent poles," she continued. "We believed the firebird was a spirit of protection, fierce, but never cruel. It flew through the flames so that others could survive." Her voice wavered. "I was meant to die with them." Randy remained still. "They claimed we killed a white rancher's wife," she spoke slowly, as if the words physically pained her. "But we didn't. It was her husband. Everyone knew he beat her. But we were different, so they blamed us." Naomi's fingers tightened around the stick. "The soldiers came first, then the townspeople. With fire, with ropes. I ran. I watched my brothers fall outside our tent. My mother screamed until the flames consumed her." She dropped the stick. "I was just a girl. They tied me up as a warning. I thought I would perish under that tree." Her shoulders shook, but her eyes, staring into the drawn flames, remained dry. Randy said nothing. He didn't offer comfort. Instead, he slowly lowered his hand until his palm pressed flat into the dirt, right beside the image of the firebird. His fingers splayed, his hand grounded. She noticed. Naomi looked over, her eyes wet now, but steady. It wasn't a comforting gesture. It was something profound, a quiet pledge. No words were needed, no promises made. Just the solid weight of his hand in the earth beside her sorrow, saying, "I see it. I see you, and I won't turn away." And for the first time since Randy had freed her from the rope, Naomi let her tears fall, not from terror, but because someone had finally stayed. The cavalry. The air was unsettlingly calm when the soldiers arrived. Randy saw the dust first, a dense column rising on the distant ridge, slicing the sky like smoke. He stood at the fence line, his jaw clenched, his eyes shielded by his hat brim. The glint of brass and the steady rhythm of hooves confirmed it. U.S. cavalry. Naomi stood just inside the cabin door, concealed in the shadow, watching him watch them. 3 men rode up, but only one dismounted. He was tall, sharp-featured, with boots too clean for this land. A silver badge shone on his chest. "Lieutenant Garrett James." His voice was crisp in the dry air. "Randy Reener." Randy nodded slowly. "That's me." The lieutenant reached inside his coat, pulled out a folded paper, and handed it over. "You're a man who respects the law, I assume. Have you seen this girl?" Randy unfolded the wanted notice. The sketch was crude but unmistakable. Dark hair, sharp cheekbones, a fierce gaze even on paper. Below it, her name, Naomi, wanted for murder and escaping custody. Reward, $75. She is considered dangerous, Garrett continued. Killed a settler's wife, stabbed 2 soldiers escaping confinement. You'd be serving the nation to turn her in. Randy stared at the paper for a long moment. Then, he refolded it carefully and handed it back. "Haven't seen any girl around here," he said flatly. Garrett tilted his head. "Are you certain? You live out here alone?" "Always have." The lieutenant glanced past him toward the cabin. "Mind if we search the premises?" "I do." Garrett raised an eyebrow. "Something you're concealing?" Randy's voice dropped lower. "Only my solitude. I intend to keep it." For a moment, the 2 men held a rigid stare. Then Garrett offered a thin smile and remounted his horse. Well, if you do observe anything out of the ordinary, Raynor, we'll be close by." And with that, they rode off, leaving suspicion and silence in their wake. Randy watched until the dust swallowed them. Then he turned and walked slowly back to the house. The question. Naomi was sitting at the table, rigid as stone. She had heard everything. When he stepped inside, she didn't speak immediately. She looked at him with those wide, dark eyes, partially afraid, partially something else. Then, quietly, she asked, "Why did you cover for me?" Randy hung his hat on the peg, then looked at her for a long time, searching for the right words. When they came, they were simple. "Because I see you," he said, "and I don't see a killer." Her lip quivered slightly. She looked away, as if the weight of being believed was heavier than the rope that once held her. The bond. That night, after the sky had turned to black velvet and the stars pierced the haze, they sat together by the fire. The wind outside droned against the walls, but inside the cabin was quiet and secure. Naomi was wrapped in the woven blanket, her knees drawn up to her chest. Randy sat nearby, slowly sharpening his knife, the sound of stone on steel steady and calming. After a long silence, Naomi moved. She turned toward him, her eyes catching the firelight, and slowly reached out. First, she placed her hand over her own heart. Then, she leaned forward and pressed that same hand to his chest, over the spot where his heart beat solid and slow beneath his worn shirt. Randy froze. She did not speak. She didn't have to. The meaning pulsed between them, fierce and silent. "I am still here, and so are you." His hand rose, not to reject or question, but to cover hers, their fingers interlacing. In the flickering firelight, something shifted. Not a confession, not a formal pledge, but a profound understanding. And for the first time, neither of them felt alone. The confrontation. The sun was low, casting long golden shadows across the dry land when the riders approached. Randy heard them, first hooves pounding the dirt, voices sharp with collective fury. He stepped onto the porch, his rifle hanging loosely across his back, his hat brim obscuring his eyes. 5 men rode into the clearing. Leading them was Joe Cormarmac. Joe had always been a violent man, wearing a badge once. Now he was just leather, guns, and a sneer that stretched too wide across his face. "Well now," Joe called, swinging down from his horse. "You always had a knack for strays, Randy, but this one's serious trouble." The others dismounted behind him, rifles in hand, their faces taut with resentment. Randy did not flinch, did not speak, simply watched. Joe swaggered up to the porch, spitting into the dust. "The word is you're hiding her. The half-blood girl who supposedly burned a whole settler camp and killed a man with his own blade. Is that accurate?" Randy offered no answer. Joe gestured toward the cabin. "We're going to take a look. You got a problem with that?" "Yes." The single word cut through the air. Joe blinked. "No?" Randy's voice was low and unwavering. "This is my property. You are not welcome here." Joe laughed, but his eyes were cold. "Randy, don't be a damn fool. We'll burn this entire shack down if necessary. We are not leaving without her." Randy stepped down from the porch, slow and deliberate. The rifle remained on his back. "She is not yours to murder," he stated. "She is mine to safeguard." Joe's smile vanished. "You think that mouth of yours can stop 5 armed men?" "No," Randy said. "But I'll start with you." The air went taut as a wire. No one moved. Then Joe lunged. Randy sidestepped the punch, spun, and drove his shoulder into Joe's chest, sending him sprawling backward. One of the other men raised his rifle, but before he could aim, Randy's hand was on his, twisting hard until the weapon fell. Randy did not fire a shot, did not draw his sidearm, but he moved with fluid, relentless speed. Using their momentum against them, he dodged, disarmed, and countered. One man stumbled over his own feet. Another cried out as Randy's forearm cracked across his nose. Dust billowed up, and the horses nervously backed away. The 5th man, the youngest, maybe 17, froze, eyes wide with terror. "Get out!" Randy roared. And just like that, the fight ended. The men scrambled, cursing, dragging Joe to his feet. Randy stood in the center, chest heaving, shirt ripped, knuckles bleeding, his eyes burning with a fierce resolve. Joe spat blood. "This isn't finished." "It is," Randy said. "For you." The men mounted up and galloped away, the sound of their retreat echoing against the canyon walls. The shared heartbeat. Naomi had witnessed the entire scene from the doorway. She hadn't moved or breathed. But as the dust settled and silence returned, she stepped off the porch, barefoot in the fading light, her gaze fixed on him. He turned to her, bloodied, bruised, but still standing. And then, for the first time since he'd found her, she spoke his name aloud. Randy. One word, yet it contained everything. Gratitude, awe, hope, fear. He looked at her and nodded once, slowly. "Yeah," he said. "I'm here." She moved toward him, first tentative steps, then faster. When she reached him, she didn't weep. She simply leaned her forehead gently against his chest, right where his heart was still pounding furiously. He raised his arms, briefly hesitant, then wrapped them around her, not to capture, not to claim, but simply to hold. In the dying light, amidst blood, dust, and the memory of ropes, they stood for a long, quiet time. The revelation. The wind softened that night, sighing low through the sagebrush, as if the desert had finally relaxed. Stars pricked the endless dark above Randy Reener's ranch. Inside the cabin, the lantern cast a warm glow across the walls. Randy sat by the hearth, mechanically sharpening his knife. Across the room, the girl stood near the window, wrapped in his old flannel shirt, her dark hair loosely braided. She had been quiet all day, but tonight there was a profound stillness about her. He glanced up. "Still sleeping on your feet?" She didn't answer at first. Then she turned, walking slowly toward him, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. "I have something I need to tell you," she said, her voice low. Randy set the knife aside and looked up. She sat across from him, hands folded in her lap, her eyes steady but veiled. "My name is not Naomi," she began. "It never was." Randy didn't blink. He waited. She inhaled. "My true name is Cyan. It means bringer of life. My mother named me on the night of a blood moon. She said it was a sign that I would carry both fire and healing." The word Cyan seemed to shift the very air. "I was 6 when she taught me to paint firebirds on bark," she continued, her voice distant. "She said they traveled between worlds. Messengers, protectors, survivors. The night they came, the soldiers. The men from town, she painted one on our tent door. Her hands trembled now. They dragged us outside. I still recall the look in her eyes when they set the tents ablaze. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared at them, as if memorizing the face of every man responsible." Randy leaned forward, watching her, treating the sound of her voice as a precious, fragile thing. "She shoved me into the hollow beneath the roots of a downed cedar. Cyan told me to be quiet, that if I survived, I would have to carry something. Not hatred, not vengeance, but the truth." She finally met his gaze. "You want the truth, Randy? Here it is." Her voice broke. "If I wasn't half white, if I didn't have your blood in me, too, would you still have cut me down from that tree?" He did not reply instantly. Instead, he reached across the space between them and gently placed his hand on her cheek. The calluses on his fingers were like worn leather, but his touch was soft, unwavering. "I don't love your blood," he said quietly. "I love the resistance inside it." Cyan's lips parted slightly, a sharp breath catching in her throat. Her eyes searched his, and something ancient within her, something that had been braced for betrayal every day since the fire, began to yield. Then slowly she leaned forward. Their foreheads met first, then their lips. The kiss was not desperate, not hungry. It was a release of fear, of silence, of the burden they had both carried for too long. It lasted just long enough to express what neither could articulate. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his. He kept his hand on her cheek, his thumb brushing beneath her eye. "You believe me?" she asked, barely a whisper. I believed you the moment you drew that bird in the dirt, Randy murmured. Outside, the night deepened. The fire crackled low, and the desert wind shifted direction, as if the land had exhaled and found peace. Inside the cabin, two people sat close enough to hear each other breathe. Not as strangers, not even as fugitives, but as two parts of something fractured that had finally begun to heal. The decision. The sun had barely set when the riders were sighted on the ridge. Dust billowed behind their hooves like smoke over the earth. Randy Reener watched from the fence post, his spyglass tight in one hand, the other near his revolver. Even from this distance, he could distinguish the blue uniforms and the glint of brass, the U.S. cavalry. "They're coming," he muttered. Inside the cabin, Cyan stood at the window, her arms crossed. She showed no fear. Her eyes were fixed on the hills, as if by watching them she could delay the inevitable. A soft tap on the open door made her turn. Randy stepped in, removing his hat, his face etched with the gravity of a decision already made. "I saw the flag," he said. "They're a day out, maybe less if they push hard." Cyan nodded once, slowly. "You knew they would return." "I did." "And you stayed." He stepped closer, placed his hat on the table, and looked her directly in the face. "I stayed because this us is worth more than the dirt they want to bury you in." She looked down, her fingers gripping the fabric of her blouse. "They won't stop, Randy." "I know," he said. "Which is why we can't remain here." Cyan looked up. "Run?" He shook his head. "Not running. Just relocating. Somewhere their laws hold no sway. South, over the border. There's land where no one knows your name. Where they won't look upon your skin as a criminal offense." She was silent for a long moment. Randy moved closer, his voice low and firm. "I'm not asking you to conceal yourself. I'm asking you to live with me." Her breath hitched. "I'm not afraid of them," she said. "Not anymore." "I know," he replied. "I'll go," she said. "But not to escape. I'll go to live with you." A silence passed between them, soft and final. Then she smiled. They left before the moon climbed, two riders moving through the dark. Not heroes, just a man and a woman with nowhere left to go but forward. As they crossed the dry creek bed, she looked back once. "I will remember the sound of the wind here," she said. He nodded. "I will remember the first time you spoke my name." Then came the shot. Randy lurched back, blood blooming on his shirt. "Randy!" Cyan screamed, pulling him to cover. His eyes were glazed. "You were tied to a tree once," he rasped. "I won't let you be abandoned again." She pressed her hands to his wound. "Then don't die," she said, her voice steady. "We live together, or we fight together." They sought to extinguish her for her ancestry, yet he loved her entirely not for her appearance, but for the unbreakable spirit she refused to surrender. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that even in a harsh world, love can still carve out a haven, then this is your kind of frontier. At Wild West Love Stories, we share tales where resilient hearts face fierce trials. Don't write off yet. Hit the like button, subscribe, and join us.